sixth technical session organized by Nigeria Society of Engineers, Prof Manchester branch, titled Thinking Outside the Box, Technology Disruption in a Post-COVID West Africa. Today's our technical session will be delivered by a distinguished academic and a professor of architecture at Manchester School of Architecture, United Kingdom, Professor Ola Uduku. My name is Engineer Patrick Obidoyin. I'm the Pro-Tem Publicity Secretary of NSE Pro-Tem Manchester branch. A quick shout out to some distinguished personalities in our midst. We've got quite a lot of registered participants, but I'll quickly recognize Engineer Isaac Olorunfemi. I don't know if he's on yet. We also have members of the steering committee, led by Engineer Dr. Obuks, the branch chairman, Engineer Camille Okedara, Engineer Dr. Mohamed Ngala, Engineer Dr. Akilu Yunusa Katungo, and last but not the least, the General Secretary, Engineer Dr. Irene Okade. Prof, it might delight you to know that more than 160 participants registered for today's webinar. We believe they will be joining as we go on. So a quick and brief introduction to our guest speaker. Professor Ola Uduku completed MPhil and PhD degrees in architecture at the University of Cambridge, focusing on school design in Nigeria, and has taught in Liverpool, Strathclyde, and Edinburgh universities. She took up professorship in architecture at the Manchester School of Architecture in 2017. Prior to this, she was Reader in Architecture and Dean International for Africa at Edinburgh University. Her research specialisms are in the history of educational architecture in Africa and contemporary issues related to social infrastructure provision for minority communities in cities in the West and South. She is currently engaged in developing postgraduate research and teaching links in architecture urbanism, heritage and conservation between West Africa architecture schools and those in Northwest England. She has in the past published in the areas of Africa architecture, Africa diaspora studies, gated communities, and environmental design teaching pedagogies. Professor Uduku is also the coordinator of Eden App Tools for Environmental Analysis Lab, which focuses on developing apps for use in teaching environmental concepts, such as lighting, thermal comfort, and acoustics to undergraduates through the use of personal apps and sensor. Before the lecture we commence, I'll quickly give the floor to Engineer Dr. Books for the chairman's opening brief. Dr. Books, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Engineer Patrick. I hope you can all hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Once again, a very warm welcome to all participants today. I'm indeed very delighted and honored to have you all attended the 6th NSE Manchester technical session. Like Patrick said, my name is Obuks Ejokomu. I'm the Pro-Tem branch chairman for NSE Manchester, and I'm also a senior lecturer in project management in the University of Manchester. Before we continue, I just want to acknowledge the immense support we have received from the University of Manchester in ensuring that the NSE Manchester branch takes off very well. We also would like to acknowledge the invaluable support of the current president of the Nigerian Society of Engineers and also the executive secretary of the Nigerian Society of Engineers for their continued and invaluable support. Just before I hand over to our guest speaker, I just want to quickly go through a few housekeeping today. So for today, we'll be very pleased if you can keep your microphones muted while the guest speaker delivers her lecture. While she's delivering her lecture, we'll really encourage all participants to use the chat box to post any questions that they will have for the guest speaker. We'll collate all of the questions as they are posted in the chat box. And once the guest speaker finishes, she will be presented with these questions. And I'm sure she will be delighted to provide answers. At the end of the technical session, we'll move on to the general meeting. And at that point, we'll give members updates on the survey we have done on the digital library project that is being handled by the NSC Manchester branch. So at this junction, without much ado, I would like to invite Professor Ola Uduku to give her lecture. Thank you, Mom.
Thank you very much. And I would like to thank Books and also the President for inviting me to give this talk today. I feel I'm in a very august audience, albeit digitally, and maybe that's important in relation to the lecture or the talk that I'm going to give you. I see it as being much more of an informal talk because you can see my background. I'm probably treading into areas where angels dare to tread, but that is not a reason not to discuss this and explore it. And also, I think it's very an important point that we are in. Obviously, we're in a situation with COVID that none of us have had any experience of. The last major pandemic was in 1917, 1918. And I thought, just to start off, part of the reason why I have this image on the first slide is not just because I'm religious, it's because this is actually the image of an open air church in Akosombo in Ghana, built by the contractors. And the idea here is that the technologies, even of the day, this is back in the 1960s, would have suggested it would have been normal concrete construction. But as you are all engineers, you can see that this is very much a wooden portal frame with a very simple roof. And interestingly, again, in terms of our thinking about things now and in today's politics, it's probably quite apt. It's actually a memorial to all those who were involved in constructing the Akosombo Dam who lost their lives. So there's a list of all those who lost their lives. There are about 50 of them, both Ghanaian workers and Italian workers. It was Impreglio, the Italian building firm, that was involved in building the dam. But again, this shows an early, I would say, example where even though they were contractors and the building materials that you would normally have used for a church were available, they were already able to start thinking creatively about creating what I would call much more of a form than just the building form, which is important both in terms of creativity, but also using materials in the best way possible to really appreciate their use. Because as you will know, Ghana, like Nigeria, has amazing timber and hardwood, and to create something that both exposes the timber and shows the possibilities of timber from a structural perspective makes it, I think, even more special. So if you are ever in Akosombo, ask for the Italian church. Right, so going forward, I thought what we would do today is look at what the possibilities are in this post-COVID period that we're in our looking at what the potential is to think outside of what might be our standard box. So moving to the next slide. I would say that the usual in terms of technology, if we're looking at just our day-to-day lives, was very much a combination of using the Flipboard and, to a large extent, what I'm doing now, the PowerPoint. But what has changed so much, I would say, nowadays, and it's interesting because I think this is a situation where thinking outside the box actually started from elsewhere. It wasn't necessarily from the UK. What you can see here was a seminar I was...
Sorry, Prof, can I chip in? They would like to see the slideshow.
Is it not showing?
Not yet. It's not showing. It's not on slideshow yet, please.
Right, okay, just a second. Oh dear, this is bad. I will just try to, I'll try and send it through again now.
Well, it's showing, but it's not on slideshow mode.
It's not on slideshow mode. Okay,
Yeah.
I'll see if I can, just a second, I'll see if I can get that to work now as slideshow mode. Right. Is that slideshow mode? Is that better? Hello?
I think actually,
it is on presenter view, I think, because it's actually showing the subsequent slides. So we can see all the slides coming.
Right, it shouldn't
I can see up to the next 9 slides actually.
Right. Okay. There's somebody downstairs. I'll come through and see if they can help me out. Just a second.
Patrick, do you want to do some introductions while Prof gets back and sorts that out?
Okay. While we wait for Prof, I've just realized engineer Isaac Olorunfemi has joined us. It's a bit unusual, but we know today it's a very big day. For those who weren't aware, there was a public lecture in his honor today by Akure branch. So we welcome you, sir.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Yeah, I came in about the time when the president chairman was speaking, so I didn't want to disrupt. So I was like 2 minutes late into the meeting.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I want to thank the chairman. Well, since I have a minute now, I'd like to thank the chairman and everyone. I saw Rain, I saw you, I saw Camille, and so many others. I saw our technical secretary, Akilu, and quite a number of others. Thank you all. It's a great honor for me. I also reminded the president because he called me thereafter. I believe sometime soon he will come into the meeting. Congrats. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, sir, and congratulations on the big day and of the success.
Thank you.
Hello. I'll see. I can't seem to get anyone to. I'm going to stop share and try again. Is that okay?
F5. F5.
Right. Let's see if that will work this time. So I'm going to go back to share. Rather, let's take this back to ordinary view. Escape. Right. Okay. Let's try present a view. Right. Can I share the screen again? I seem to have lost the screen.
But are you still co-host?
I'm not. I'm no longer co-hosting.
Okay, let me try and see. No, I think you are still co-host because.
Oh yes, you're still a co-host, Prof.
I think co-host, Prof.
Okay, okay. Share screen. Okay, I've got it now. Right. So now I'm moving the screen to here, and I'm going to go into presenter view. Is it going to let me? What can you see now?
We can't see anything yet. It might still be coming up. Yes.
Or can you still see the same as before?
Yes, we can still see same as before.
Right, I might have to.
Prof, sorry, Prof. Can I suggest that you just go up to the PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Slideshow.
So if you can just click escape.
Escape. Okay, let's do that. It's not letting me escape.
So you need to stop sharing, I think.
Stop share. Okay.
Yeah, and yeah, if you can just go to the PowerPoint slide. So Camille, you want her to use the button at the top?
Yes, yes.
You use slideshow.
Yes. Slideshow, yeah.
Let's see.
Yeah, that's
and
the
click
one.
start and click begin. Start from beginning.
Right. Let's just see.
Then share your screen.
Share screen.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can now get to share the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Oh dear, it's gone into escape mode. Oh dear. Share screen. All right, share screen. I think it's the sequence now that is the issue.
The share screen is at the bottom.
I've done that, but I think because I'm working with a Macintosh, it's doing things slightly differently.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, look, I think
it will come on, I think. On the alternative,
it's to send them to Ubooks, I think.
yeah, exactly. So he can control the slides.
Hang on, let me just see. I'm swapping displays. Is that any better?
So if it's a Mac, so you need to leave the pop.
Yeah.
Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Same as before.
I think you can continue.
I swapped.
Yeah, I think it's on slideshow, but it's on another view.
Yeah,
That's
it's
right.
presenter view. That's fine. I think we just have to.
Yeah, let's just continue.
To be honest, it doesn't distract that much. As long as you can see the main slide, it's a shame that I'm not quite sure why it's not because we did it earlier and it didn't do this, but for some reason.
Prof, you sent to Ubooks. You sent to Ubooks.
Okay, I'll see if I can do that now.
Okay.
Pause share. Stop share. Right. Oh dear. So has it stopped sharing altogether? Books. Not being. I think it's much slower than it needs to be. Look, what I'm going to do is just try and make it as large as possible and keep talking because we're losing time now. And I think that the images such as they are okay at this level. So I'm just going to go back to share screen and see how it works in terms of, so I'll just swap the display. So that's back to where it was. Escape, right. And I'm going to go into share screen, which will be good. Share screen, it's good. And then I'm going to take you to the image, which is that one. Right, so that's it. And then I'm going to go into slideshow, that's it. Okay, so, strange. So you can now see screen 2, is that right? Not quite.
I think it's still coming on.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, it will come. Just.
Right. Right. Okay.
You need to go.
We're now screen sharing. So
Yes. So I think.
that's okay. You can see. Can you see the screen now?
Yes, we can.
Yes, I can see. We can. Yes.
I think we'll just.
Yes, I can see you right now.
Right. We'll go on with that as it is. I think that's fair enough. It's a good enough screen in terms of what I wanted it to be. So, can you see the screen? I'm on thinking outside the box. Is that right? Okay. So I mean.
Yes, I can see you right now.
The screen as well, or just me?
Yes, I can see.
The screen.
Yeah, we can see yourself on the screen.
Yes.
Okay. So just quick recap. I'd started the introduction talking about this chapel in the Akosombo Dam, or near the Akosombo Dam in Ghana, and the way in which it was designed, for both materials and I think creativity. What I then I was going to talk about was what is the usual now when we talk about technology. So a lot of the technology, I would say until COVID-19 to a large extent, was very much around using the PowerPoint presentation, which I'm using now quite badly, and the standard ways in which we communicate, whether it was through the Flipboard and so on and so forth. But I think what has happened, which is very interesting since COVID-19, which I actually first engaged with in Nigeria, was this, which is where we are at the moment. suddenly the new normal has become very much using technologies like Zoom, like Teams, like Go to Work and so on to begin to communicate at an international level. Now, unusually in terms of technology, and this is where we could talk about disruption and the ways in which, in some ways, it comes from any angle. The Zoom technologies and so on, a bit like PowerPoint and so on, were already in existence. Most of us in academia know that the idea about the MOOC, the massive online learning platform, was very much around, has been around for the last 10 years at least, but nobody had actually taken it up. But what I did find prior to COVID-19 in Nigeria, this was back in January, was that already colleagues I was interested in developing links with were saying, well, even if you can't come across, we can always Zoom. And I wondered what Zoom was. The first place I saw Zoom was actually at the University of Lagos. And I think that this idea about adopting technologies that are useful for certain groups is something that, again, sometimes disrupts the ideas about technology being technology transfer from the north to the south. Sometimes the technologies are there, and the South has actually been much more successful in, I would say, adopting the technology and actually using it for our own benefit. In the case of, I think, where we are now, and this is exactly where I am standing and talking to you, the technology to actually use Zoom, or rather the expertise, is actually in many ways better embedded in areas of the South, particularly places like West Africa, where you could say that, I guess for reasons that related to both travel, nowadays both political and economic, the cost of travel and the political requirements of visas and so on, the efficacy of using technologies like Zoom have been grabbed with the two hands and have been really developed. I mean, again, I'm having more problems here delivering the talk to you from Scotland, as it happens, than possibly I would have had if it was being beamed from Lagos. They're very, very suave operators who are able to actually manage the program and use the program. But interestingly as well, areas around technology are areas where I think that there has been some disruption in the way in which we've been able to manage the technology. But obviously the issue would be, we don't just want to manage the technology. This is a point where we want to actually look at how we develop and own the technology. So we're not always just the users, we're actually those who are actually able to determine where the technology takes place. So in the case of Zoom, as we know, it's a subsidiary of Google. Is it Google or is it Microsoft? It is Google. But what we are able to do, though, very successfully, is to use it for our own needs. And I would say this is probably the future in terms of how we communicate. There's no doubt with a post-COVID situation, we do know that there are going to be further of these, unfortunately, not pandemics, but epidemics, where the ideas of travel, the way we used to travel, are going to change. So the fact that we've already begun to embrace what this might be puts us in a stronger position and a stronger place to be. So if we think about that, this disruption is not just, I would say that the idea about the Zoom discussions, the Zoom conversations, or the embracing of Zoom by Africa is nothing new. We have actually been disruptors of technology for a while. To the top left of my slide is the M-Pesa currency exchange, which, as we know, originated in both between Kenya really and Somalia. And again, it's one of these where, using the Nigerian parlance, condition make fish bend. This was due to the embargo on moving money that had been imposed, particularly because of the insurgencies around Somalia, where the mobile phone became the way in which we're able to move money or move resources and money to people across countries using GPS technology again, which is there, and it wasn't necessarily developed in Africa. But the idea about the moving of currency is that it actually predates some of the activities that we do now on our mobile phones. And indeed, it then gets developed further. So in the slides, in the image to your top right, you've got digital payments for electricity and currency. by townships in South Africa. So, you know, again, the development of the technology for the requirements of those who need it most. So compared to the normal way, I have to say, really still in Nigeria to a large extent, where one is still paying using the receipted system and cash, you can now do it with your mobile phone and you're logged and so on. The bottom left, again, as engineers, you'll know this is the solar collector as an electricity generator. I would say that we've been very slow to the mark, or at least relatively, in comparison to the fact that we are one of the most, well, the continent has one of the largest areas of sunshine that is guaranteed. Certainly in North Africa, Morocco and so on, there's a significant use of solar collectors. We do have areas where we use solar collectors for electricity generation, but the idea about using it and having the step down transformer, this is again actually the KNUST campus. So, you know, we do know that these technologies are there, and indeed they could disrupt our standards and thinking in terms of how we deliver areas like energy, or in this case, financial services that are much more appropriate to our needs than necessarily the centralized way in which currently services and technologies take place. The bottom right is the rapid urban transport system on Ikorodu Road in Lagos. Again, this is one of the ones where the received version was that this will never work. But again, this is where you start to discuss social capital and economics. The discussion was with the private taxi drivers, and the agreement was, you know, these prioritized lanes will be kept for rapid transport at the peak times during the day. So despite whatever chaos people believe in terms of taxi drivers and so on in Nigeria, particularly in Lagos, there was a way in which, with negotiation, this system has actually been able to run. It's not perfect, but again, it shows that with some forward thinking, one can actually plan and respond to the requirements of the people. So particularly in the case of Lagos, as anyone will know, driving from Ikeja to Lagos can take as long as it takes in terms of the traffic. But to have a rapid system has actually meant, in terms of World Bank analysis, that a lot of people living at the Ikeja end were able to get into work in time, which, you know, again, in the post-COVID situation, will be interesting to see how this pans out. So these were the kind of, this is what I'd call the disruptive technologies that we already know of. I think there are emerging technologies that are going to be even more disruptive, which again, I would say in post-COVID times, we want to take a look at. And indeed, talking about COVID itself is a very interesting study. What we do know is that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, because of the work they had been doing with Nigerian schools of medicine and indeed medical facility, they were able to actually reference the whole of Nigeria. This was done originally for eradication of polio, which, as you would have heard 2 days ago, has now finally been eradicated throughout Nigeria, but also in terms of the tracing and tracking related to the Ebola pandemic in Liberia stroke Sierra Leone. With the use of, again, mobile phones, they were able to actually basically geolocate all of us in Nigeria. The geolocation of Nigeria is complete. So it's not just GIS, you've got geolocation and mapping. This means that, this meant that at the height of the Ebola epidemic, if you had Ebola and you were identified as having it, you could be tracked. And that, to a large extent, was able to stop the flow of Ebola from Liberia across to places like Nigeria. So in some ways, again, given, as we do know now, the politics of what's going on now, some of that tracing and tracking that we're talking about, we already have a lot of ability and both the technology and the knowledge to carry it out successfully. I would suggest that if you don't do it already, the World Service has a regular broadcast called Africa in Focus, or Focus on Africa. there was a very, very clear description from a Liberian doctor about how they do trace and track in Liberia. And to be honest, it would put certain governments, which shall remain nameless, to shame in the straightforward way in which it was being undertaken and how the community was involved and so on and so forth. So this is again the issue about the technology, especially when it's available, is something that does not necessarily have a location that is north-south. Often it's taking both the ideas and then sometimes applying those ideas to particular situations. And I would say in the case of West Africa, particularly nowadays, there seems to be a push towards thinking further outside the box. Having said so, there are still massive problems. We do know that testing using, or rather it's not the testing now, it's more the track and trace works very well, but issues around how we can guarantee the testing and whether we have enough of the facilities in terms of ventilators and so on is still a problem. But some of the very basic problems, which I do think are actually technological and engineering focused, are things that we are quite able to work on and develop in a very successful fashion. So the idea, I guess the thesis I'm coming through with here is that it is important that we are able to utilize our understanding of these technologies. And by applying them, we can actually begin to think outside what I would call the standard box, which is, oh, well, we wait for the information to come from the north and then we apply it. Oftentimes, if we have the raw material, so to speak, we can actually begin to look at what is most appropriate and what actually, in some ways, better responds to our requirements in, I would say, particularly Africa, but in this case, Nigeria. So going on, so indeed, what next? Well, what I then did as part of preparing for this lecture was to say, well, you know, what other areas of technology are we really looking at? And one of the areas which, again, you probably know because it's very close to most engineering staff, engineering graduates, is fintech. And I don't have the image as I wanted, so that will be good. What I did find was that after South Africa and Kenya, Nigeria is number 52 in the world in terms of its development of fintech services, and that's financial technology. And these are things from the InterSwitch. There are about 5 technological firms, which are probably further down on my slide, which would be interesting. So now I'm in presenter view, I can't see it myself. But there are 5 technology firms that have done incredibly well, all of whom are founded by Nigerians. I think 50% of them are actually engineers. But anyway, so that link between finance and engineering, you probably all know. But I mean, again, the fintech is something really quite new in the sense that we're looking at using technology to what would I say, catalyze finance. So the very basics, I guess, at the beginning, when I talked about M-Pesa, are things that you use with your mobile phone, but the next level is actually using these financial codes to be able to switch money, move money, create things like card credit receipts and so on and so forth. Now, there are 2 things here that are very interesting. One, about 20 years ago, the market was totally controlled, again, by the North. But what we do now have are entrepreneurs in Nigeria who have been very successful in beginning to create a really strong fintech industry. And as you will know, compared to, I have to say, particularly Kenya, where I do know something about the background to the entrepreneurial finance and so on, what makes Nigeria stand out is that, like South Africa, we have local entrepreneurs who have both the financial backing and now the technological nous to actually be able to develop these. And in fact, some of the most successful of these firms, as you know, are already have been sold on to places like Silicon Valley and so on. So this is an area where, again, you know, we have a lot of potential to be able to develop things further. So you might say, well, how does that relate to things? Well, I think the point is that, again, it's this application of ideas and being able to think about them in terms of development. And we've looked at finance, we've looked at health, and we've looked at some of the earlier disruptors. So I think bringing it back to what I would call, I guess, my home, which is more the built environment, and the ways in which we can begin to look at the built environment differently, I think from a much more African perspective, is when we go back slightly in history. This is Ola Oluwakiton House, which was designed in the 1960s on Awolowo Road in Lagos. The architect, Alan Vaughan Richards, is British, married to a Nigerian elite. And what he did was to begin to explore ideas again. So back to my first slide and the idea about the church in Akosombo. This is a much more, as you can see, developed building. It's much more complicated. But what was very interesting about this building is that he does use the modern materials, the concrete and so on, but the interiors and the ways in which he engages with local materials again, so carvings, wood, textiles, comes across in the building. It later on became Bacchus, the restaurant that some people might have remembered in Awolowo Road. But importantly also from a technological perspective, historically, this is the first building I have seen in Nigeria that used solar collectors. We're talking about 1966. So well before a lot of the research was going on, even in parts of Israel and the Americas, California, so the idea about using the solar panel as an energy generator has as long a history as this in Nigeria. And I say this because this goes back to a long time ago when I was doing my master's thesis. And I always wondered, why don't we use solar collectors in Nigeria? We're talking now about the 1980s and so on. And you have to ask whether it's social, political, or just that, again, we weren't ready, or we still are not necessarily always ready to think outside the box. Because for my money's worth, up until most recently, most of the big hotels and so on, where you want hot water from taps, we are still using boilers. In the tropics, we're using boilers to get hot water from taps when we have free electricity outside. I think what's changed, fortunately, now is that at least the idea about photovoltaics for lighting is coming on stream. But some of these ideas, again, have been very much there, but we've never been able to really, I would say, utilize it and apply it, which is what we should be doing as creatives and also as those who are involved in the technology. So I think that's a really salutary historical note. So where does that take us today? Well, I think today what's happening in terms of our architecture, particularly, because I'm now going straight through, is that we have this, I would say, dichotomy, which is not useful. We have on the top left, which shouldn't be South Africa, that's wrong. The top left is the plan for Eco-Atlantic City, which is likely to be the largest gated island in sub-Saharan Africa. Well, actually, it's being challenged by Le Fleuve in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And we know the social politics of this. I mean, on every count, there are issues. Basically, the image to the right is of what used to be Makoko. Basically, by creating this island, the drainage goes straight into this informal settlement. So we have a situation where there's, well, first of all, it's high engineering. And I hear it is a Dutch firm. I mean, the Dutch are very good at this, but it's the Dutch firm that's actually created the islands. And this is, the story buildings. I think it's basically challenging Dubai and other places. But the reality, again, if we look at the socioeconomics, is that, for one part of the world, this is what's happening, or for one part of Lagos, probably the largest gated community, because the idea is that you can actually fly in and fly out, and it would actually be an export protection zone and so on and so forth. Whereas for a significant part of Lagos, the reality is the image to the bottom right. And I would say that this is not tangible, and well, it is tangible, but I think the idea about how we deal with things like this is something we want to look at. I mean, if we're going to apply technology, I think technology for good is always a good starter, but also it's how that affects, I would say, the communities in which we want to think outside the box and actually think about working with the technology to develop, as well. I guess this is a development, but it's a very specific development for certain parts of the population. So what might be next? Well, I think what might be next is, again, looking at the indigenous, but also, again, creating thinking about how that would work in terms of how we want to look at the future. So these are some ideas about domestic, well, not domestic, actually commercial activities in, again, Lagos. So we've got the Bogobiri restaurant at the bottom, and we've got the Kaltura, I've got it wrong, Kaltura, it's a restaurant and an art gallery in Victoria Island. And here we've got a situation where I would say the architect particularly is breaking away from the normal way in which we look at the modern, and engaging much more with, if you like, what you could call an adaptation of the traditional. I thought particularly the top left-hand drawing, that's the Terra Culture, that's right, Terra Culture restaurant. What you have is a ramp that goes up to the first floor. And you can see, if you look closely, that there's the idea about the spider's web. So, and obviously that's a cast concrete ramp. So it's both, I would say, beginning to explore ideas of culture, but also in terms of our looking at things like disability and access. The idea that everybody can go up the stairs, and indeed, I guess, taking into account the fact that half the time, if you don't have electricity, the lifts are not going to work, is doing two things. It's actually responding to a requirement to be able to move to another level in a way in which most people can do it, but it's also creating a form of art or culture in terms of the way in which it's thought about. So it really is thinking outside what would be our normal box, so to speak. And in this case, this is a colleague of mine in Ghana again. He was able to create basically a courtyard cafe area from what was a derelict building, which again, in a bit like the Nigeria, real estate would suggest normally a real estate person would buy the land and build luxury flats. But by doing this, it's an area where they actually have open air radio shows. These are some of our students who were down there a year and a half ago now. Can't have been this year because of COVID. And interestingly, the French President Macron, he actually had a coffee, a beer, a star beer in this area. So the idea again that we have to go into the air-conditioned hotels and so on is beginning to be challenged. There's much more of an idea about what's natural, what might be interesting in Africa, as opposed to our mimicking to a large extent what is considered to be fashionable and modern from the Western perspective. I mean, a note to this again, as most will know, is that with the whole COVID thing, the idea about cross ventilation and so on, which is standard practice in our architectural education in Africa, is something that now has become, this is the new, so to speak, in the West. But in some ways, we may well be, again, better equipped to design buildings that actually allow for this airflow and so on, that has now become a major issue that we're looking at here. And to sort of conclude, I mean, I think the issue is, how do we incorporate these practices? Well, I think part of it is that we're looking both at the history of the past, but also we're looking to the future. So in no way am I saying that, when we're looking at thinking about technologies, we have to go right back to the historic and the cultural. Nobody's saying we have to go back to living in mud huts or anything like that. But what we are saying, or what I am saying, is that when we're looking at technology, we can actually begin to, I would say, both embrace it, but also create from it what is relevant to our needs. So at the top end, of course, we have our star architects. At the top is a concept shopping centre by Sir David Ajayi, the architect. And at the bottom is the EcoBank headquarters, which is again by a Ghanaian architect, which has used, I guess, much more of the bottom particularly is using much more in standard, I guess, modern materials. But the conceptualization of the circle has the map of Africa on it, and it's oriented towards the north. So it's got this whole narrative around how it relates to its space in Ghana, which, as you might remember, is seen as a center of Africa because of its Pan-African credentials and so on. Whereas David Ajayi's building on the upper level is using things like wooden micro-cut wooden slats to, again, respond to the requirements for shading and so on and so forth. So in both these cases, there's been an embrace, I would say, of much more modern technologies, but it's been very much adopted and adapted to what might be relevant for Africa today. And I think this is where I actually ended the talk, the discussion in my kind of, I would say, engagement with how we're actually beginning to challenge our use of technologies, particularly the fact that the technologies that we're using, however modern they are, can go both ways. We don't always have to wait for the technology to come to us. We can actually use these technologies, embrace them, and begin to look at ways in which they actually respond to our needs. And historically, we have been doing bits of this in the past, but I think this moment, this post-COVID moment, gives us a particular chance to be able to think about which of these technologies we can actually adopt, how we can embrace it, and how we can actually, I think, in some ways, if not necessarily do the South-North, we can certainly do the South-South, because there's a lot of sharing happening already. But importantly, we can personalize it, we can nationalize it, we can make it something that we can actually both be proud of and begin to think about how we develop the way we want it developed. I think I'll stop there. Sorry for the delay.
Wow. Thank you so much, Professor Uduku. I think it's been a while since I had such optimistic painting of the global South. Not only optimistic for the use of the words for the sake, but actually you evidencing it, okay, that these things have been with us. So I'm very, very delighted that you have set the tone for today. I will call on my very good friend, Professor Shofoluwe, who is joining us from North Carolina in the US. But while he gets ready for his question, I will just read out one of the questions that have been posted here for Prof to deal with. This question is coming from engineer Dr. Vincent Balogun. His question goes, in adopting disruptive technology, we should not forget some individuals, policymakers, etc., that are resistant to this change. What is your take on this in thinking outside the box?
Well, I think he said it himself. I think we cannot wait for the policymakers to move the change. I think change often happens at the ground level. Again, there are interests. Part of my research those years ago when I was doing my master's thesis was that it was very clear that solar panels would work in Africa, but for reasons best known to those who actually, if you like, had the power, the status quo was always, well, seemed to work well. But I think what is happening, and this is the democratization of technology, whether it's Zoom, whether it's Facebook, the days of the strongman, the political strongman, are very much, I think, going into the past. We've seen coups everywhere. There was a coup in Mali last week, and so on and so forth. The idea that only certain people hold knowledge is already a thing of the past. But what this, I think particularly technology does, is democratize the knowledge, which is something that I think will mean that the policymakers might have a stance, but generally, okay, I think there are areas where, because they have so much money and power, it's difficult. But there has been, over the last 10 to 20 years, and again, The Economist, a lot of the financial analysts and analyzing papers say very clearly that Africa, after probably Asia, is an area where there will be development, because we have a large population, they are much more educated than they used to be, and they are able to use these technologies to push things where at sometimes are being blocked elsewhere. So, you know, we've moved a long way from where we were maybe in the 70s and the 80s. So it is difficult, but the groundswell of opinion is moving in the direction of development and, I think, democracy.
Thank you very much, Prof. Shofoluwa, are you with us? I would like to call on you and to maybe comment on and ask a question of Professor Uduku, please.
Good afternoon from United States.
Hello.
Yes, hello. I really enjoyed the presentation, and again, Ubux, it's good to see you. I have a question with respect to e-commerce technology. Mm-hmm. I begin to see that some areas of Nigeria are beginning to implement e-commerce, but e-commerce comes with its own challenges. So what would you say about the challenges and how we can, or Nigeria can protect e-commerce technology so that we don't have all these scam artists, to disrupt the entire thing? It's a good disruptive technology, but are we ready for e-commerce really?
Well, I think, again, let's throw it back. I mean, the issue is that we know that the 419s, a lot of the scammers were Nigerian. So in some ways, again, you could say that we are better prepared to understand what these scams might be like. But no, I think it's back to, let's go back to first principles, to what I was saying. We know the technology is there, but do we own the technology? When you own the technology, then you begin to, again, think about what the worst case scenario is. So there's the scenario planning and so on. There is no doubt that, yes, in Africa and elsewhere, the issue about trust and so on is problematic. But again, despite all the stories about how corrupt places indeed like Nigeria are, that, the bad stories always sell. And I think what is so interesting is that we have clearly financial whiz kids, because they are quite young, most of them, who are able to go right down to the same algorithms that are causing chaos here in terms of admissions to schools and so on. At the end of the day, a lot of these things are to do with your understanding of to be honest, the mathematical models behind what's being done. And I think particularly, again, Nigeria and South Africa, and to a lesser extent Kenya, a lot of the ability to do that financial analysis and modeling exists. And we know that because, again, back in the 70s and 80s, we knew we had very strong mathematicians and engineers. And what they're able to do now is to apply this to the new tech. And back to the days, again, I mean, I'm probably not the oldest on the call at the moment. I can remember registering at University of Nigeria Enugu campus, and we were already starting to use the punch cards. I don't know what they did with them, but there was some major mainframe computer. The beauty of technology and computing now is that literally my mobile phone has more capacity than whatever went to the moon. So the micro development of the technology and the fact that you can do anything wherever you are. So I'm talking to you from Edinburgh, you're in America, just shows you how fast the world has shrunk. And that has been beneficial, again, to a lot of us in the South. Things that we wouldn't have been able to do, we can do. But again, in some ways, our Southern experience means that I'm less trusting probably than my European colleague is anyway. So if you put that into the way in which we deal with technology, it has to be a positive. And actually going back to my lecture, the 4 key firms were InterSwitch, Aelia Credit, and Flutterwave, eTransact, and Remitter. And Aelia Credit has already been sold on the stock market. So these are all Nigerian founded firms. A lot of them, I have to say, were to do with Nigerians who are based abroad in America and the UK, but they're all Nigerian founded fintech firms.
Thank you very much. One more question, and then I will give the rest of the audience the opportunity to ask the question. GPS is another emerging disruptive technology, and I understand that Lagos is the only state that has perhaps partially implemented the GPS system. And as we all know, GPS requires constant updates. So what is your take on this to, can it be a technology that can be sustained, in Nigeria?
Well, actually, there's GPS and there's GIS. What the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation are using is more GIS than GPS. GPS is the global positioning satellite. GIS is smaller packets. And used to triangulate the whole of Nigeria, which is what they used to be able to complete the polio and smallpox vaccination systems. And also they're using it for malaria. So GPS is useful, definitely, and that's what you would use for your TomTom and so on. But there are other systems and satellites out there that will do the same thing. I mean, you could say that, I guess, back to my earlier premise, ideally Nigeria should have its own satellites up there because we're dependent on the satellite systems of mainly the Europeans and the Americans. But again, it is free to use, and unlike GPS that is very locked into one, I think, as I understand it, and I'm not a full technology geek, you can actually swap between satellites. It's a bit like having different mobile phone providers. So although certainly the place that is most covered is Lagos, we still have significant coverage throughout the country. I guess the other line to that, of course, is that equally, I suspect other military installations and so on have that, but you know, we're part of a global world. So, I mean, I think it is being rolled out much more, but we do already have significant coverage elsewhere. Same thing with, I think for most of the major West African countries, so both the Francophone and the Anglophone, we are part of that. And this was the issue about the Ebola thing, because we have fairly good infrastructure up until when you get to the Liberias and the Sierra Leones who had been war ravaged. Most of the other countries have actually begun to build a technology infrastructure, which is what we need.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you so much, Prof. And we have a few questions. Just to double check, Ola, are you able to see the questions, or should I keep reading them? I need to save time.
I'll go on to the chat. Now that I've finished projecting badly, yeah. I can actually look at the chat. That's okay. Good. Right, I'm on the chat now. Yeah, there are lots of questions. Good grief. Okay. Let's see. Right. Let's see. Okay. Reminder. Should we not?
I think Ferdinand was asking you if okay. He's interested in knowing where in Nigeria you've deployed some of your...
I've just seen it. Well, I mean, I did start as an architect. I just found research more interesting. I have designed a few buildings. I used to work with, before I came out to do my PhD, I worked with James Cubitt, architects in Lagos. Ayinke House, the maternity hospital donated by Sir Mobolaji Bank Anthony before he died. I was part of the design team, particularly the gates, because I can remember doing the details. But I've mainly been involved in domestic design. So I've designed buildings for my relatives and so on. But in a future life, I'm hoping to have better links with particularly architecture schools in Nigeria and Ghana, but particularly Nigeria, probably Unilag, and also my alma mater, University of Nigeria, Enugu campus. And yeah, I would be interested in sort of beginning to getting back into design and looking particularly at design for communities and informal settlements. That was always my original ambition. One of the reasons I ran away into academia was that I didn't really want to become a star architect. The difference even then in the 80s was very clear. We were designing for the very rich, and next door to them would be the very poor. So that's always been one of my major ambitions. Right, there's another question. What are your recommendations to researchers and engineers with regard to thinking outside the box? Well, exactly that. You know, I think part of it goes back to, I guess, our own value systems and recognizing what we have. So, I mean, I still was very struck by that chapel in Akosombo. You know, it wasn't designed by an architect. But the structure, well, again, you guys are engineers, the structure of that building just shows how simple structure can be. And I think it's being able to see past, I guess, what is the norm. And in the case of Africa, I think there's a quotation from Pliny, so the classical scholar, that there's always something new out of Africa. But oftentimes we don't value what the new is unless we look at it. And I think that being part of the global system has been good for us because some of this technology we would not have known. But part of what we do need to know, or what we do need to value, is what makes us original. And that isn't just copying the modernity and the technology. Certainly we want the health, the education and so on, but how do we interpret that? And I think particularly for things like technology, because there's the idea about what underpins what we're doing, but there's also the creativity about how you design a bridge, whatever it is you're designing, which I think we probably need to focus on much more. So we take the technology and the ideas from the West, but we then again own it and formulate it the way we want to. And I always give the analogy, we're very good at kind of textiles, art, performance, but we just need to move now into, I would say, the structure as well. Right, so I'm just going through as well. How can we disrupt up and the downstream process to bring back our flow and eliminate the fuel subsidy scam? Well, I mean, again, you only need to go to Brazil. They use sugarcane to create fuel. But anyway, I mean, as we all know, we are supposed to be going to zero carbon. So we should be looking again at more electricity in terms of electric vehicles and so on. But I think, you know, I think there's some problems. They're the big problems, but they're the basic problems. So if we go back to transport, you know, we should be using more bicycles. That's the reality, isn't it? There are things we could do that we could start to look at. So again, this is the thing about starting small and then looking at where we're going in the larger scheme of things. And again, I was very impressed. There is actually a bicycle group in Lagos who are now encouraging women to get on their bicycles. There's already one in Ghana, but they're always much more sophisticated than us. I mean, I say it's because they have fewer of them, but the reality is there are things like that where we can start looking at what transport might be, which is again why I showed you the rapid urban transport system. I mean, we have to ask ourselves, is it still sustainable for one person and his driver in Nigeria generally to drive from Ikeja to Lagos? That's the question we have to ask ourselves. And if we're not going to do that, then what are the possibilities? You know, if it's not mass transit, what other possibilities are there in terms of transportation? And indeed, back to the whole COVID thing again, do we have to go into the office 5 days a week? I mean, there are ways in which we can start to think about how we use our transport, and then we can think about improving the transport that we have. Right. Standard architectural building. So engineer, okay, this is private, but it makes sense anyway. How do we use disruptive technology to ensure we have standard architectural building? I think it's the same thing. I mean, our building standards, to be honest, come from the United Kingdom. And some of them are very good. Back to what I was saying about cross ventilation and so on. These are standards that are better than the standards they have here, where you can have an internal bathroom with no ventilation. And then, you know, these are some of the issues that are coming around how air circulates and how long COVID, Legionnaire's disease and so on can stay in an HVAC system. I think the point is going again back to that first slide of mine. There's some very interesting work in places like Vietnam where they use bamboo and so on. There are lots of, I would say, materials and technologies that are actually better and more responsive to Africa. I know people will say, well, it's fine to say use bamboo, but if you're in Africa, you need the security. But even in terms of our security gates, there are different ways to do it. There's the creativity and then there's the actual functionality. So there are ways in which we could actually, again, look at the craft, how we incorporate craft into our design of buildings at all levels, and even our designs of communities, because the gated community, I have argued in books in the past, is not something that is actually that new. Again, we've had, if you like, gated or whole cities, Kano and so on, have their own gates, but it's how you create that community within that, and whether that in itself has more than just the gate. You know, what are the things you could have in a shared gated community? Could it be shared, indeed, solar collection, water panels and so on? Because the individuality versus the communality, and this is where you're looking at culture. versus the much more individualistic culture that we are all used to when we live in the West. But that's no reason for us to just transpose that to how we live in African cities. Are there other questions I haven't picked up?
Okay, I don't think you've missed anyone, but I think I just want to invite Engineer Dr. Aki Adeoye. He was struggling to log in, so I'm not sure he may be optimistic as yourself, but finally he was able to join us. Engineer Adeoye, please.
Yeah, good evening. I'm happy I eventually got in and I enjoyed the bit of it. Thinking outside the box, I think is a big challenge, and I think it's quite topical, and it will be very useful to us. I want to congratulate Manchester for putting us through this one.